Yara had always been fearless. A warrior from the proud and powerful Jalar species, she was trained from childhood to be ruthless and swift, cutting down her enemies with precision. The Jalar were feared across the galaxy, their advanced technology and unmatched fighting prowess making them the dominant force in space. Yara was no exception. Her name alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of any who heard it. The mission was simple enough: capture or kill the human soldier who had been leading a resistance on her planet. He was the leader of a small group of humans, surviving against all odds in the underground tunnels of the Jalar-controlled city. His name was Commander Jack Wells. For months, Yara had heard whispers of his tactical genius, his ability to escape the grasp of the Jalar time and time again. To her, this human was a mere nuisance, an insect to be crushed. But when she finally saw him, Yara was caught off guard. The underground prison was dimly lit, the air thick with moisture and the smell of damp stone. Yara's boots clicked sharply against the cold floor as she entered the holding area. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, locking onto the figure shackled to the wall. He was sitting there calmly, as if waiting for her. Jack Wells didn't look like a warrior. He was thin, with messy dark hair that fell into his eyes. His clothes were ragged, a far cry from the armor that Yara and her fellow Jalar soldiers wore. He seemed human, weak and small in comparison to her towering presence. But there was something in the way he held himself, his posture straight, his eyes clear and unwavering. That made her pause for a moment. "Commander Jack Wells," Yara spoke, her voice cold and commanding. "Your resistance ends here." Jack looked up at her, his expression unbothered, almost as if he had expected this moment. "Is that so?" His voice was steady, not a hint of fear in it. Yara felt a flicker of irritation. How could this human be so calm in the face of death? She had expected him to beg, to plead for his life, or at the very least show some sign of fear. But instead, he simply stared at her with those piercing eyes as if challenging her. Without warning, Yara advanced, her fingers curling around the hilt of her blade. The weapon was a thing of beauty, sleek, sharp, and deadly. She had never used it against anyone who could stand against her, and she didn't expect this human to be any different. As she stepped forward, Jack didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on her. "You're not like them, are you?" he asked, his voice soft but clear. "You don't have to do this," Yara paused. She had heard similar pleas before, pleas from those who were desperate to save their lives. But something in Jack's voice was different. There was no fear, no begging, just a quiet, unwavering conviction. She found herself momentarily confused by it. "I don't need your sympathy, human," Yara growled, stepping closer. But Jack didn't look frightened. Instead, he looked at her with something else. "It's not sympathy," he said. "It's understanding. You're not like the others of your kind. I can see it in your eyes." Yara's hand tightened on the blade. She had no time for this nonsense. Her mission was clear, and yet she found herself hesitating, the words lingering in the air between them. She had always been certain of her actions, of her place in the galaxy. She was a Jalar, and the Jalar were destined to rule. It was that simple. Jack seemed to sense her internal struggle, his voice lowering. "You don't have to follow them. You don't have to be part of this war." Yara felt a sharp pang in her chest. She pushed it away, focusing on the task at hand. "Enough," she said, raising her blade. "You're just a human. Your time is over." But before she could strike, something unexpected happened. Jack, despite his restraints, moved faster than she anticipated. He kicked out at the chains holding him, sending a jolt of energy through the shackles. In an instant, the chains shattered and Jack was on his feet, standing before her. For a split second, Yara froze. She had expected a desperate, helpless human to cower in fear. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man who refused to be broken. Her blade still raised, Yara took a cautious step back. Jack's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not your enemy," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this," Yara blinked. His words were strange to her. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't begging for mercy. He wasn't even trying to fight back. All he was doing was speaking as though she were a person, not a monster. For the first time, Yara felt something stir inside her, something unfamiliar, something she didn't have a name for. "What are you?" she asked, lowering her blade slightly. Her voice wavered for the first time in years. The certainty that had always been with her, that had guided her throughout countless battles, was suddenly slipping through her fingers like sand. Jack's expression softened. "I'm just a man trying to survive," he said. "And you don't have to kill me to do your job. You can let me go." Yara didn't know what to think. The thought of letting him go felt wrong. She had been trained to eliminate threats, and Jack was a threat. Or at least he had been, but now standing before him she wasn't so sure. "You don't understand," Yara said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do," Jack replied simply. Yara's grip on the blade loosened. For a moment, she simply stared at him, at this human who refused to be afraid, who seemed to see her as more than just a weapon. Her mind raced. What was this feeling? Why wasn't she killing him like she had killed so many others? Why was she standing here talking to him as though he was an equal? For the first time in her life, Yara felt something shift inside her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Something she didn't understand. "You're not what I expected," she said softly, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Jack gave her a small, wry smile. "You thought we were all the same. But we're not." Yara didn't know how to respond. She had been taught that humans were weak, that they were nothing more than pests. But now, standing in front of this man, she wasn't so sure. The silence between them stretched on, and for the first time, Yara wasn't sure what her next move should be. Yara stood in silence, her blade still raised, but her body tense and uncertain. She had never felt this way before. Every instinct, every ounce of training she had ever received, told her to eliminate the human before her. But the words he had spoken, calm, steady, and full of conviction, had shaken her in ways she couldn't explain. Jack Wells, the human commander who had led a resistance against the Jailar, wasn't begging for mercy. He wasn't pleading or crying. He wasn't even afraid. He was just standing there, looking at her as if they were two equals, two beings from different worlds who could somehow understand each other. Yara couldn't understand it. Why was she still standing here staring at this human? Why hadn't she followed through with her mission and ended his life? Her training told her that there was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. And yet, here she was, caught in a moment of confusion. For a brief moment, Yara felt the weight of her decision bearing down on her. She was a warrior, trained for battle, forged in the fires of her people's relentless pursuit of power. She had never questioned her orders before. But now, with Jack standing before her, she felt as if everything she had known was starting to unravel. Jack broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "You can't keep doing this, you know," he said. "Not all of us are your enemy." Yara's grip on her blade tightened again. His words hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't know how to respond. Instead, she took a step back, trying to collect her thoughts. She had come here to kill him, to stop the human resistance from spreading, and yet she had found herself in this strange confrontation, questioning everything. "What do you want from me?" Yara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want anything from you," Jack replied. "I just want you to see things differently, to understand that this war, it's not what you think it is. The Jailar have made a mistake. We're not the enemies here." Yara felt a flicker of anger rise within her. "The Jailar don't make mistakes," she said, her voice hard. "We're the superior race. We do what must be done." Jack shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's what they've taught you, isn't it? That you're superior, that you're above all others. But maybe they've lied to you." Yara flinched as if he had slapped her, but she didn't look away. There was something about the way Jack spoke, something about the way he didn't back down, that made her question everything she had been taught. She had never met a human like him before. Most were weak, desperate, and ready to beg for their lives, but not Jack. He stood before her with a quiet strength that made her feel like the ground beneath her was shifting. Before she could respond, there was a loud noise from down the hallway, footsteps, heavy and echoing in the cold, damp corridor. Yara's instincts kicked in. The Jailar soldiers were coming. Her moment of uncertainty was over. She couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. She turned sharply, scanning the shadows. Jack's eyes followed her movements, and for a moment they seemed to share the same thought. She had to get out of there, and quickly. Without thinking, Yara grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him toward the door. "We need to go," she said, her voice urgent. Jack didn't resist. Instead, he followed her lead, running alongside her as they moved down the corridor. The sound of the approaching soldiers grew louder, and Yara knew that if they didn't escape now, they'd be caught. She didn't know why she was helping him, why she was even listening to him, but something about Jack made her act against her instincts. against everything she had ever been taught. They reached the end of the hallway, where a narrow passage led into the darkness. Without pausing, Yara pushed open the door and ushered Jack inside. The door slammed shut behind them, and they were plunged into the dimly lit tunnel beyond. For a moment they both stood there, breathing heavily, trying to regain their composure. Yara's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't from the chase. It was from something else, something she couldn't explain. Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to help me," he said. "Why did you?" Yara didn't answer immediately. She didn't know what to say. The truth was, she wasn't sure why. She had never questioned her mission before, never questioned the Jailar. But now with Jack by her side, she found herself torn between the two worlds. She had a duty to her people. But she also felt an unexpected connection to this human. She had never felt this way before. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "I shouldn't have, but I couldn't just leave you there." Jack nodded slowly as if he understood. He didn't push her to explain further. Instead, he just fell into step beside her as they made their way through the winding passageways. It was a strange journey, one that neither of them had expected. They were supposed to be enemies, two forces locked in an unyielding war. And yet, here they were working together, with no clear idea of what came next. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Yara kept glancing over at Jack. She noticed how he moved, his every step calculated, careful. He wasn't running aimlessly, but rather he was thinking ahead. He was always looking for the next step, always calculating the risks. There was a part of her that admired that. She had always been taught that the Jailar were the most strategic of all species, but Jack's mind worked in ways that were different from hers. His methods were more human, more unpredictable, yet there was something brilliant about it. "I didn't think you would be so smart," Yara admitted, her voice almost surprised. "Most humans are not like this." Jack glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. "Most humans are trying to survive. Some of us do it by thinking our way out of problems instead of fighting our way out." Yara frowned. She had never really considered that before. To her, survival had always been about strength, about overpowering the enemy, about dominating every situation. But Jack's way was different. It was subtle, clever, and in its own way just as effective. For the next few hours they moved through the tunnels, avoiding Jailar patrols and hiding in the shadows. Yara was amazed at how easily Jack navigated the underground maze. He seemed to know exactly where they needed to go, as though he had already studied the area for months. His knowledge of the tunnels was as impressive as his ability to stay calm under pressure. They finally came to a small hidden chamber deep within the tunnels. Jack turned to her, a small smile on his face. "We're safe for now." Yara nodded, her mind still racing. They were safe for now, but the situation was far from over. The Jailar would never stop hunting them. She had made a choice, and now there was no going back. She had helped Jack escape, and she had given him a chance to live. But what would happen next? She didn't know. All she knew was that for the first time in her life she felt a strange sense of hope. The days that followed were filled with tension, uncertainty, and a growing bond that neither Yara nor Jack could fully explain. They moved deeper into the underground tunnels, away from the prying eyes of the Jailar soldiers. The underground network of passageways seemed endless, and for the first time Yara felt a sense of disorientation. She had always been in control, confident, capable, and unwavering. But here in the shadowy depths of the planet's surface, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. Jack, on the other hand, appeared completely at ease in the tunnels. He moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the surroundings, always aware of potential dangers. It was as though he had lived in these tunnels his entire life, and his calmness only served to remind Yara of the growing respect she had for him. They had stopped for a brief rest in a small chamber, a quiet space hidden from the outside world. Jack was sitting against the wall, cleaning his equipment with the careful hands of someone who had been through numerous battles. Yara, meanwhile, was pacing, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't shake. "You don't have to keep moving," Jack said after a while, looking up from his gear. "You've been pacing for hours." Yara paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at him. "I can't sit still." "We don't have time to waste," Jack smiled a little. "You've been saying that for days now. We're not going anywhere until you're ready." Yara scowled, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had always been in control of every situation. But this was different. Jack had disrupted everything she had known, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad one. She didn't know how to deal with the growing feeling inside her, this strange, unexpected connection to a human. "We need to find a way out of here," she said firmly, brushing aside her inner turmoil. "The Jalar won't stop looking for us. We need to stay ahead of them." Jack set his tools down and stood up slowly, stretching his arms. "I know, but we also need to think. You can't just rush through everything without a plan." Yara's jaw tightened. "I'm not rushing. I'm being practical. The longer we stay in one place, the greater the chance we'll be caught." "I'm not saying you're wrong," Jack replied, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "But we're in this together now. If we don't work together, we're both dead." Yara's eyes flashed with something like defiance. "I don't need your help. I've always been able to do things on my own." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one who's been running from your own people for days now." His words hit harder than she expected, and she felt her chest tighten. Yara wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like him. She had been raised to believe that the Jalar were the superior race, that their way was the only way. But Jack's words, his quiet, firm belief in the power of collaboration, were starting to make her question everything. "I don't need to be told how to survive," she snapped. Though there was less force behind the words than she intended, Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply sat back down and resumed his task of checking his gear. The silence between them stretched on, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was different. Yara found herself staring at him for a moment longer than usual, her mind trying to piece together something she didn't understand. "You're very stubborn," Jack finally said, breaking the silence. Yara blinked, her gaze snapping to him. "And you're incredibly patient," she said, her voice low. Jack smiled softly. "I've had to be." There was a long pause, and for the first time, Yara allowed herself to reflect on the situation. She had spent her entire life believing that humans were weak, inferior to the Jalar, but Jack was different. He was smart, resourceful, and far more capable than she had given him credit for. And yet, there was still something about him that puzzled her. He wasn't just a soldier, he was something more, someone who believed in something greater than just survival. "Why are you helping me?" Yara asked, her voice softer now. Jack looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment. "Because I believe we can make a difference. You don't have to be part of the Jalar's war. You've seen what they've done. You know it's wrong." Yara felt a cold shiver run down her spine at his words. She had always known what the Jalar were capable of. She had seen it with her own eyes, lived through their cruelty. But hearing Jack say it, hearing him speak of the Jalar's actions as though they were something to be undone, struck her in a way she hadn't expected. It was as if a door had been opened in her mind, and she could see the world through a different lens. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Yara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack stood up, walking over to where she stood. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was both simple and profound. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. But you're not alone in this. We can figure it out together." Yara stared at his hand for a moment, surprised by the warmth of the gesture. In all her years as a Jalar warrior, no one had ever treated her like this. Like an equal, like someone who mattered. Her heart, which had always been hardened by years of combat, now fluttered with an unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was something else, something she wasn't sure how to name. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," Yara said, her voice small. "You don't have to be ready," Jack replied. "You just have to choose." Yara felt a weight in those words, a responsibility that she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. But as she looked into Jack's eyes, something inside her told her that this path, the one she was walking now, wasn't as impossible as it had seemed just a few days ago. "I never thought I'd be in this position," she said softly. "But maybe you're right. Maybe there's another way." Jack gave her a small smile. "I'm glad to hear you say that." The next few days passed quickly, with Yara and Jack continuing their journey through the underground tunnels. Despite their initial tension, a quiet camaraderie began to form between them. Yara began to see Jack not just as a human she was supposed to destroy, but as an ally, someone she could trust, someone who had proven himself time and time again. They worked together to find supplies, always staying one step ahead of the Jalar forces. Jack taught her how to move more quietly, how to think like a resistance fighter, while Yara shared her knowledge of combat tactics and strategy. They began to complement each other in ways they hadn't expected. One evening, as they rested in a hidden alcove, Yara found herself looking at Jack in a new light. He was still a human, a soldier in a war she had never asked for. But he was more than that. He was someone who had shown her a different path, a path where survival wasn't just about strength and domination, but about fighting for something greater. As they sat in the silence of the underground world, Yara knew that she was no longer the same person who had walked into these tunnels days ago. She had changed. And no matter what happened next, she would face it with Jack by her side,